Okay, so you ever just get sucked into those fad diet articles, like, the ones that promise you miracles if you just, I don't know, sprinkle in some exotic superfood or whatever.
Right, right.
Well, this deep dive is kind of like that, BUT. Instead of like, I don't know, some kind of berry you can't pronounce,
Hmm.
we're diving into a world where steak isn't just a meal, it's like the whole menu. We're talking meat-only diets, like all the time.
Yeah, and what's really interesting here is it's not just the latest diet craze,
Oh,
right? You've brought us this article about Dr. Shawn Baker and his, well, it's pretty radical, his carnivore approach to health. So it goes way beyond, kale smoothies and quinoa bowls. It really makes you think about how we see food, our bodies, even the whole healthcare system.
exactly. And full disclosure, I got to say, when I first saw meat-only diet, I was like, whoa, okay, that's got to be extreme.
Yeah.
But then the more I read about Dr. Baker, his background, the stories from his patients even, it's like, okay, we got to look at this.
For sure. That skepticism is definitely a good place to start, though. I mean,
Right.
it's easy to just dismiss anything that sounds a little out there, a little different without really getting it. But that's what we do here, right?
Yeah.
Dig into these ideas.
See what we can learn.
It's like that part in the article where Dr. Baker talks about medical school, and he's basically saying they tell you straight up, look, a lot of what we're teaching you, it's going to be outdated eventually.
Right.
Makes you wonder about all that nutrition advice we've been given our whole lives.
Absolutely it does. Like, how do we know what to trust?
Right. It really highlights the fact that what we know or what we think we know about health, about nutrition, it changes. And that leads us perfectly into Dr. Baker's critique, let's say, of the traditional food pyramid.
Oh, yeah.
The one they've been shoving down our throats since what, like elementary school?
Yeah.
He's saying there's not a lot of hard evidence that a well-planned meat-only diet is going to lead to all those scary vitamin deficiencies.
Yeah.
In fact, there was that Harvard study. It actually found no big difference in vitamin deficiencies between, your committed carnivores and folks on a more standard diet.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to picture, like, living on bacon and burgers. Even I have my limits. And speaking of limits, the article brings up this whole thing about, the healthcare system. And is it really in their best interest to keep us healthy? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
what if they make more money when we're sick and need procedures and medicines and all that?
Yeah. It's a cynical take, but it's not totally out there.
Right.
The article points out that potential conflict of interest, like are they in it for our prevention or for their profit? That's something that I think a lot of people wonder about.
Absolutely.
So,
Totally. Okay, but let's get to the part that really, I don't know, I was most interested in. These stories, and they're almost hard to believe, about Dr. Baker's patients, and they're choosing steak over surgery.
yeah.
I mean, we're talking people opting out of knee replacements, serious stuff, just from switching to a meat-heavy diet. Honestly, I had to read those parts twice.
Yeah, those anecdotes, they definitely grab your attention.
They do.
It really makes you think about diet and its connection to chronic inflammation, right? Because inflammation, that's your body's way of dealing with injury or infection. We know that.
Right.
But if it's always switched on, so to speak, well, that can lead to a whole bunch of problems. Arthritis, heart disease, you name it.
Oh, wow. So maybe there's something to this whole reducing inflammation through diet idea, even if those stories sound a little too good to be true.
Exactly. And look, we can't really make conclusions based on a few stories, right?
Right.
But it definitely gets you thinking. And it actually ties into a point the article made that, I don't know, really stuck with me. This idea that just because two things happen together doesn't mean one causes the other. You know what I mean?
Correlation, not causation.
Right, exactly. But it does give us clues about where to look closer, right? So, yeah, we need more research on this whole diet affecting inflammation thing for sure.
Okay, so fascinating stuff. But now for the big question. I bet everyone's thinking it. What about all that red meat?
Yeah.
The whole clogged arteries lecture we've been getting our whole lives.
Yes, the great cholesterol debate. It's like completely ingrained in our minds, isn't it?
Totally.
That cholesterol equals bad news. But here's where it gets really interesting. The article talks about this meta-analysis. Basically, it's a study of other studies.
Okay.
And this one indicated that higher cholesterol, maybe it's not actually the big bad wolf we always thought it was.
So bacon for breakfast, IS back on the table. I'm asking for a friend.
Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. It's not a free-for-all on fatty foods.
Right.
See, the point Dr. Baker really emphasizes, and this is key, it's not about meat being the enemy, really. It's the manna of processed junk that most people are eating along with it.
Okay.
Sugary drinks, fast food, chips, all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
His whole thing is focused on eating foods that are whole, that aren't processed, whether that's meat or, yes, even vegetables.
And, that's something I think everyone listening can relate to. It's like we're surrounded by this processed food everywhere we go.
Oh, I know it. It's a nightmare.
So even if you're not, ready to go full-on carnivore, cutting back on that stuff has got to be good for you.
100% agree. And I think that's a big part of why Dr. Baker's philosophy is so appealing, even for people who aren't ditching their veggie burgers anytime soon.
Right.
Less processed food is good for everyone, period.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about potential benefits. We talked about this whole cholesterol question
Right.
and this big emphasis on whole foods. But the article also mentioned Dr. Baker's clinic, Rivero. It seemed like a really different way of approaching healthcare.
It is unique, yeah. Their whole thing is about finding the root cause of the health problem
It's okay.
instead of just, putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms, which I get it, that resonates with a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The idea that you can figure out what's actually going on and fix it, not just cover it up, it's very appealing. But and this is important, this whole approach, it's not exactly mainstream medicine for a reason.
What do you mean?
Well, it means that while the philosophy behind it is really interesting, it needs more research. The really rigorous kind.
Okay.
We need more data, more studies, especially long-term ones, to figure out if it really works and if it's safe in the long run, especially since it's so different from, traditional dietary advice.
So not necessarily a quick fix, but a lot to think about for sure.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up this deep dive into Dr. Baker and his approach, what's kind of the main thing that stands out to you?
There's just so much to unpack with this whole thing.
I know, right?
But for me, I think what gets me is that it really makes you think twice about what we've always just accepted as truth about health and nutrition.
Absolutely. It's like he's saying, don't just take our word for it, go figure it out for yourself, which I kind of love.
Exactly. And that's so important, especially now when everyone's got a different opinion about what you should or shouldn't be eating.
That's overwhelming.
Right. So yeah, it's about taking control and figuring out what works for you, what makes you feel your best.
I like that. So that's kind of where I wanted to leave this for our listeners.
Yeah.
We've gone through this wild ride of a diet. We've heard some pretty unbelievable stories and even got into a bit of the science behind it all.
Right.
So I got to ask, is anyone ready to give up those veggies and just live on steak and bacon?
Okay, hold on now. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're not saying everyone should go full on carnivore here.
Of course not.
But hopefully this deep dive it made you think a little.
Right.
Maybe question some of those food rules you've been following your whole life.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you know your own body better than anyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Look, this wasn't about giving you a new set of diet rules to follow blindly. It was about giving you the tools to ask the right questions, to experiment a little, and really find what works best for you.
What really connected with you? Were there parts that made you think twice? And what would you want to ask Dr. Baker himself if you had the chance? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so keep those questions and comments coming.